Today's daf is daf Tzadi Dalid. Let's just summarize the Mishnah that'll lead us to the Gemara on daf Tzadi Gimel Mid Beis. And we saw already the Mishnah, so just to summarize it, the Mishnah allows you to send a yerech, an entire thigh, that has the gin anosh inside of it, to an akum. And the reason for that is that even if a Jew would buy the yerech, because very often the akum was the middleman, he got profit by buying and then selling. So if he'd sell it, let's say in a town that's mostly Jewish, then the Jewish buyer would realize when he sees the yerech that it's a full thigh, a full yerech, and therefore he will not eat it until he removes the gid anosh. So the Gemara is medayik that the Mishnah says that if the yerech is whole, then there's no problem because obviously the gid anosh has not been taken out. However, if it's chatucha, if, let's say, the Jew sends a sliced piece of meat over to the guy, and obviously he's going to get some payback from the guy who sells it, the guy will make a profit by selling it, he'll sell it, the guy, to a Jew, and then the Jew has no clue whether or not gid anosh was removed. And since he only sees a slice of meat, he has every reason to believe that since the Jew sent it over to the guy, then it must have been kosher v'yosher and the gid anosh was removed. So the Gemara wants to know, what are the circumstances in which the Mishnah would prohibit sending a chatucha, a sliced piece, but permit sending the entire calf, the entire kaf yerech, meaning the entire thigh. Now, we have to know that there were two different traditions, and this has to do with nevela and treifa. And there were places in which the tradition was, the custom was, that if, let's say, the Jewish butcher in that locality realized after the shechita that the meat was treif, the animal was treif, or let's say, for example, the shechita was not a shechita and therefore the animal is nevela. So in such a case, what they would do is they would make an announcement in the marketplace that on that particular day, they sold to the akum a nevela or treifa, in which case the Jews would know that on that day, they should not be buying meat from the market, in the marketplace from the guy, because it might be nevela or treifa. There was another minhag, another custom that was quite well accepted, that they didn't make any announcement in the marketplace, and in that case, the Jew would not be able to buy from the akum at all, because he has to worry about the fact that maybe what the guy received from the Jew was nevela treifa. So the Gemara now asks the following question, and we're going to turn now to begin our daf on daf tzadi daled. B'mayas kinon. What is the case? What is the local custom that's being addressed by our Mishnah? Elam, if you're going to tell me it's b'makom she'ein machrizim, so that means they don't have the custom to make the announcement in the marketplace that there was an nevela treifa there, then it makes no difference what was sent by the Jew to the guy, whether it be shlema or chatucha, because in any event, the Jews are not going to buy from the guy. In that case, given the locale that they don't announce when there's nevela treifa, then the Jew is not allowed to buy from the guy. He might be buying nevela treifa, and therefore chatucha nami lishtarle. Even if the meat was sliced up which would give a misimpression that maybe the Gid Anosha was taken out of it, it doesn't matter. Who cares if he gives it to the guy and the guy will sell it possibly as a nevela treifa to non-Jews, but the Jews themselves will not buy it. They're not allowed to buy it. Ella, by process of elimination, we have to assume that the Mishnah is talking about a case, b'makom shemachrizim, where they announce that on this day, no one should buy meat from the akum because the butcher, the Jewish butcher, found that the animal was a treifa. So if that be the case, then shleima nami lo lishtarle. Since now we're going to allow the Jews to buy from the akum, then the Jew in this community where machrizim, where they announce that there was a nevela and a treifa, then if you don't remove the gid anosha, then in the case where there was no announcement made, because on that particular day the Jewish butchers did not discover to their chagrin any nevela treifa, so there's no announcement, so that would allow the Jews to buy from the goyim because of the absence of any hachroz, any announcement to the contrary, and they have a right to assume that if there's no nevela treifa, then they're going to buy from the goyim, and in that case, if you don't remove the gid anosha, then what's going to happen is the Jew might buy the entire thigh, but the guy might slice it into pieces. And therefore, you're really being machshil, the Jewish potential buyer, by sending the akum a shlema, a complete thigh. Why? Because the akum is now going to slice up the thigh. The Jew has no reason to suspect that the gid anosha wasn't removed from it, when in fact the gid anosha wasn't removed from it. So don't even send the guy a shlema, because unbeknown to the Jewish buyer, the gid anosha was not removed. The akum received a shlema, and then he cut it up into pieces. So the Jew is buying slices, and he's going to assume that the gid anosha was taken out. So the Gemara now offers two answers to this question. Ibai Same, I could tell you, if you like, that b'makom shemach reason, that the Mishnah is referring to a place where they announce if they found a treif and an avela, and Ibai Same b'makom she'ein machrizim. How so? Ibai Same b'makom shemachrizim. If you would prefer, I could interpret the Mishnah as a place where they do make hachroza in event that they found an avela and treifa, which would mean that the Jews are allowed to buy meat from the goyim in that locale where they didn't hear of any announcement, there was no hachroza. And now you're going to ask, if you send a whole thigh to the guy, then maybe the guy, and you haven't removed the gid anosha, maybe the guy will slice it into slices. The Gemara says, "Chitucha diovid kechav and made the yoda," which means the following: that when a Jew has to remove the gid anosha, then he slices it a certain way. Let's say from the top, bottom, going down the sciatic nerve. Whereas the guy he doesn't know anything about gid anosha. He's going to slice it this way. And it'll be obvious to the Jew who buys the meat that this was sliced by a guy. And therefore he won't be tempted to eat it. He'll think that it's a possible gid anosha case. Maybe it's a place where they don't announce when they found an avela and treifa, which means that you're not allowed to buy anything from the goyim. And then you're going to ask the question, well, if you can't buy anything from the goyim, send the guy cut up thigh without removing the gid anosha. We're afraid Yisrael acher. Maybe if we allow the Jew to pawn off, so to speak, a a yerech to the guy, maybe there'll be another Jew present at that time who sees that you're giving it to the guy, and he's going to come to the mistaken conclusion that you removed the Gid Anosha. Ibais Ema. Now the Gemara offers another pshat in our Mishnah, and maybe the Mishnah is not going to let you send a cut up thigh to an idolater before you remove the Gid Anosha, not because of the Isur of Gid Anosha. We're not dealing with the regular Isurim of Achila, of Machalas Asuras, but rather we're introducing here a whole new concept, which is called Gnevas Das. Mishum de Kagonev Daite. You are misleading the guy, because when you send him a cut up thigh, he's going to assume that you already removed the Gid Anosha and that the Jewish people will buy it. And Shmuel says, also lignov das habrios, afilu daito shalovi kochav. We don't allow misleading people, pointing off something with a certain facade, which is not true. And even if you mislead a guy, that's also prohibited. I mean, this Gemara has to be compared to Sugyas and Bava Kama about whether Gezalakum is also or not. And then we have to ask whether or not Gnevas Das is a subcategory, an extension of Gezel. And the Gemara points out here that Shmuel, that statement and that ruling that we attribute to Shmuel, La B'fer Shmuel, we never heard Shmuel say it explicitly, but rather El Mechlola Itma, we had a story, and from the story we jumped or derived a conclusion about Shmuel. The Shmuel Havika over Be Mabra, Shmuel was crossing a river, and the driver of the river who took him across, the driver of the ferry that took him across the river was a non-Jew, and Shmuel felt he wanted to express his gratitude to the non-Jewish ferry driver. So what did he do? He says to his Haizbacha, Paisiu limabure. In other words, give some sort of gift to the ferry operator in order to express my gratitude. And Paise ve'ikpid, the attendant of Shmuel went ahead and he compensated the driver, and Shmuel got angry at him. He was upset. My time at Ikpad. Omar Abayi Tanagolas Treifa Avoy V'yoev Nile Bimar Deshchuta. Now the word Bimar means under the impression of. So what happened was there was a Tarnagolas that was Treifa. After the Shechita, they found out that it had some sort of internal, puncture. And the attendant decided he's hanging around with this treifa that's already, been shechted, but it's a treifa. He can't do much with it. So why not pawn it off on the Akum, on this ferry driver? But he gave the ferry driver the impression that this was a shchuta kshera, and that therefore it was a great gift that he gave because a shchuta is worth more than a treifa. Rav has a different take on the story of Shmuel. Anfika Amar Le Lashkuye. Shmuel told him, his Heisbacha, to give an anpek to drink. Anpek is a kind of concentrated wine, which is worth more than a diluted wine. The Ashke Chamra Meziga. The attendant violated the command of Shmuel, his master, and he gave to the driver diluted wine. Shmuel was upset. Shmuel thought that this attendant was deceiving the driver into thinking that, maybe it's pure concentrated wine, when in fact in emesis it was diluted wine. So now the Gemara says, why did we go ahead and point out that Shmuel didn't say this explicitly, but when we derive it from a case? Why do you have to make such a big deal? All right, so we know it by inferring it from the ruling that Shmuel gave or the anger he expressed towards his attendant. And the Gemara answers, Lamadi Omer Treifavai according to Abaye, who says that the violation here that got, Shmuel upset was because the animal was treif. Amalei Amai Tashe Isura. Maybe Shmuel was not at all concerned with Genevas Das, about the Akum thinking that it was kosher meat and so forth and so on, but rather Shmuel was saying, why are you hanging on to Tarnagolas Treifa? Somebody might come along, or you yourself might forget, and think that it's a Tarnagolas Shchuta and it's not a Treifa. That's not something you want to do. And according to Rav Lamandi Omer Anpaka Omer Ashkechuye Anpaka Chaya Mashma, Shmuel was upset because why did this attendant violate the command of his master to give the ferry driver pure concentrated wine? And he went ahead and he gave him diluted wine, but it has nothing to do with the issue of Gnevas Das. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and study some of the details about Gnevas Das, and then Amir Hashem will try to summarize the whole sugi. Now, some of the stories and the rulings of this sugi of Gnevas Das are very familiar to us. For example, Tanya, we learned to the Bryce Reb Meir Omer Al Yisharhev Adam. That's when you beg a person almost. Lechavero lisoretzlo. You bug him, come for a meal. So he knows that he's not going to take him up on the offer. So he's misleading him into thinking that he's really sincere about his offer when he really knew up front that the guy wouldn't take advantage and take him up on the offer. V'lo yarbelo b'tik roves. Tikrovos are gifts. V'odeabo she'ena makabel. He says, I want to give you a gift. I want to give you a great present and so forth. He knows the guy's not going to accept it. And his only kavanah was to mislead the person and to think he was giving him a great gift. Lo yiftach lo chavios hamachuros lechenvani. In those days, the wine was sealed in a barrel, and that kept the freshness of the wine. As soon as you opened up a new barrel, right away the wine starts souring. Now, if you sell it to someone, a chenvani, he's the middleman, then under certain circumstances, if you get permission from the chenvani, you're allowed to open it because he's immediately going to sell it, and there won't be enough time after the opening for the process of spoilage to set in. Now here, you have a barrel, it was already sold to a chenvani, and you open it in the presence of so-and-so, as if to say, you're so chashiv, I'm willing to suffer a financial loss, open up a brand new barrel, because now it tastes beautifully, for your behavior. And okay, no deal. If you notify him that, look, I sold this barrel already, and therefore it's open, I didn't open it direct, specifically for you, that's okay. For lo yomalo, for example, you shouldn't tell a person, soch shemen mipach reikon. You know what? Go ahead, take the oil from this, what do you call it, a flask of oil, and anoint yourself with it. He gave him the feeling, wow, look how chashuv I am. He's giving me his oil. Oil's very expensive. And yet, it's an empty flask. But he knows that the guy's not going to take him up on the offer. Guy is makpid on soni matanasiche. V'yim v'shvil kvodo mut. But let's say there are other people around, and by indicating that he would happily give the oil to this fellow, that's a great covet for the fellow in the presence of all those who are there. That's okay. Aini, is this really so that you're not allowed to fool him to thinking that you opened up the barrel on his behalf? Ula ikla lebei Rabbi Yehuda pasalo chavis mechuros. Rabbi Yehuda went ahead and he Chas v'shalom misled Rabbi Yehuda to thinking that, that Rabbi Yehuda was misleading Ulat Chas v'shalom to think that he was opening it for him when it always told, no, he had notified him. Ibai Seima. Shani de chaviv le Rabbi Yehuda de velav hachinami pasuch miftach le. If, let's say, in all honesty, and only you know that, you would have opened it on his behalf because he's so beloved to you and you have such covet for him, then you don't even have to notify him that it was already sold. Ton Rabbanu learned to the Brisa, lo yelech odom lebeis ha'evel. There used to be a minog that when you go to the house of a mourner, you bring a flask of wine. Ubiyado login hamiskashkshes. He's got a flask of wine that's totally empty, but he shakes it around. There's a couple of drops in there, so he makes it sound like he's bringing a whole flask of a full flask of oil. Or, for example, he has a little bit of maybe a drop or so of wine in there, but he fills it basically with water. He's fooling the Ovil into thinking that he's getting a whole flask of wine. But in Yesham Chever Ir, however, there is a situation in which it's okay, and that is where there are other people around, and he's again being Mechabe the Ovil and Ki'ilu showing him how much he loves him, how significant, what prestige, what great honor it is, and he's giving him a flask of wine. In those days, they used to shecht an animal, and they would take the leather straight away after the shechita, or perhaps they took leather from a live animal. No. They couldn't take leather from a live animal. It had to be after it's slaughtered. Anyway, so now, if the leather was taken from an animal that dropped dead, then, if you give him this leather that you made into a sandal, a leather shoe, he thinks, wow, you know what? You gave me the best of the best. You took it from an animal that was shechted. But really, in truth, it was from a dead animal. And we're afraid that maybe a serpent killed the animal and the venom is still in the hide of the animal. So that says the Gemara's first of all, you fooled him into thinking that he's receiving a great gift, a sandal from a live animal that was shechted, and secondly, because there's a danger involved. He might, get venom from the snake into his body, into his feet, as he slips into the shoes. Let's say you've got a flask of wine, and on top there's like a layer of oil floating on top, and the guy thinks he's getting wine. I'm sorry, the guy thinks he's getting oil. We're assuming that oil is more expensive than wine. And now the Gemara goes through a whole terrible story. Actually, more than one story, but the one that's relevant to us is the first one. Right, so he's got this barrel of wine or flask of wine with a layer of oil floating on top, and he invited his guests, and he starts serving them at the feast. And everyone sees the oil. He's relying on the oil. V'nichnasu u'matzah shel shal yayin. You know what? The guests expected oil, and instead they got yayin. and the host was terribly embarrassed about it. V'chonik asasra, he committed suicide. Eino orchem rashoim lite mimashal lifneihem livno ulabito shabalabayis. Selin kenot lurishus mibalabayis. If the host puts out food in front of the guests, they're not allowed to give it to the son or the daughter of the host, even though they mean well, unless they got explicit permission. And why? Because Ma'aseh B'Echad, we had a story, Sheziman Shlosha Orchim B'Shnei HaBetzores. These were difficult years of famine, and there was a very limited amount of food available. And a person, during these years of famine, he invites three of his friends. That's all he could dig up in his closet, in his refrigerator, were three eggs. Each one would receive an egg. So one of the guests gives his egg over to the son, and the other two want to follow suit. As a result, the son is holding on to three eggs, and none of the guests have eggs. They're empty-handed. Right? He's eating one of the three eggs. Two he's holding on to with his hands, and his father is absolutely fuming. He thinks that his son stole the three eggs from the guests. And he hits him, and Nebuch the child was knocked down to the ground, umes, and he died. Came in Sharasa, Imo, and the mother found out about it. Also, Lagag v'noflu mesa. She couldn't tolerate the tragic suffering and the grief in the morning, and she just jumped off a roof. Now the son is dead, and the mother is dead. Afhu ol Lagag, and now the father goes on to the Gag v'nofal umes, and he kills himself. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now, the comment of Rabbi Elazar, the Gemara is going to try to ask, what did he add over here? Al davar ze nergu sholosh nefashim Yisrael. So where it says, "My kamash," what's he telling me? I mean, we know the story. Three people died because the guests gave up their eggs, to the son of the Balabais. The Kula, Rabbi Elazar and Yaakov. The Gemara really just adds this in order to tell you that the entire story of don't give away what you received as a gift to the son of the host. That was the statement of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Torah, we learned in the Brisa, Sholech yerech lechaveiro shlema eno tzarech sheyitol heimenu gid anoshe. So now we're no longer talking about sending it to a guy, but he sends a full thigh to his fellow Jew, and the Jew sees a full thigh. He knows that the gid anoshe was not taken out of it. So therefore, you don't have to, the giver, right, the donor, so to speak, doesn't have to take out the gid anoshe because of the fear that maybe the recipient would think that there's gid anoshe there, that there's no gid anoshe there, because the yid who received this gift, he sees the yerech, it's full, it's shlema, he knows. Will be oved kochavim, but if you're going to send a full thigh to a guy, bein chatuchu bein shlema, ein etzarch litol heimenu gid anoshe. You don't have to take off the gid. Now, why is this so? You don't have to take off the gid because the Jew's not going to buy from the idolater. He's not going to eat it under the mistaken assumption that gid anoshe. Now, again, we're going to have to go through, as the Gemara will on the next Amud, what exactly is the case. Is a place where they do make achros or they don't make achros. Next, ein mochrin nevelos u'trefus lovik. For two reasons, we don't sell nevelos and trefus to a guy, and we're familiar with this. Echad neshem. First is gnevas das of the guy. Now, he doesn't know it's a nevela or a trefa. Right, maybe the guy is going to sell to another Jew this animal that he purchased, and in truth, it's an avail and a treifa. So there are two reasons, again, to summarize why you can't sell nevelas and treifas to a guy. One is because you're misleading the guy, and secondly, because the Jew who buys from the guy, he'll go ahead and eat it, not unbeknown to him is that it's an avail or a treifa. So he shouldn't send a guy with money and say to him, buy me with this dinar meat. Again, we have two problems. Here we'll look for a minute on the top of Tzadik Dalet on base. Echad hanosim, the echad shema mochrim lo nevelas utrefus. Okay, then so we'll continue in just shortly.